In the all-new Revit 2027, we have a completely new concrete tab, and this holds some concrete tools like rebar and precast. Now this video is going to be part one of exploring all of those tools on the new concrete tab. We're going to be focusing on all of the rebar tools. We're going to go through all of them and explain them in depth. Let's go. Now quickly, before we jump into Revit, I would just like to ask you to check out my website, balkanarchitect.com. It's going to be linked up in the cards above and then also down in the description of this video. If you're interested in structure for Revit, we have a course on reinforced concrete, we have a course on steel structures in Revit, and we also have a reinforced concrete template that I'm going to be using as part of this tutorial. We also have an ebook on the same topic, and we offer consulting on architecture, BIM, but also structural or reinforced concrete. So now, without any further ado, let's jump straight into Revit. And here we are in Revit. So this is the project file I'm going to be using. It simply has this concrete slab. And now let's get started by switching to the concrete tab. So on the concrete tab, within this video, I'm going to be talking about mainly about reinforcement and settings panels. And then perhaps in a part two, we'll talk about precast detailing and settings. The work plane tools are pretty much the same as they are in the architecture tab over here or structure tab over here, so we're not going to go into those too much. Now, when it comes to concrete, it does say concrete on the concrete tab. However, you can't really create any concrete elements from the concrete tab. So if you want to create concrete beams, columns, floor slabs, foundation, and so on, you actually have to do that on the structure tab. And we have a whole video on that. I can link it up in the cards above so you can check it out. But for concrete, we're mainly looking into reinforcement. So that's just something to keep in mind. And let's start off with the settings and open up the reinforcement settings. So reinforcement settings dialog controls how rebars behave, display, and this is quantified across your entire project. You want to set this up before you start placing rebar in your project because it is going to be quite difficult to change some of these settings afterwards. So for example, in this case, you can see that these two settings or these two checkboxes are checked off. So that's because here in this project I do have some rebar. Now if I delete that rebar and let's say it's an empty project without rebar, when I go to reinforcement settings, now this is available. So that's just what I've mentioned. So here first we have the checkbox for host structure rebar within area and path reinforcement. Usually you want to keep this checked on if you're using obviously rebar and area and path reinforcement. Then we have the include hooks in rebar shape definition. So what this basically means is that when you add hooks to existing rebar, it's just going to create a new shape that has those hooks basically. Then we have the option to include end treatments in rebar shape definition. So this is very similar, but instead of hooks, it's just referring to end treatments like treads, couplers, or welds. I've spoken to some experts and usually they keep this checked off, whereas this one is usually checked on. Then here we can go through the rest of the settings. So these were the general ones. Then we have the reinforcement rounding. Now you can check this on if you want to use rounding, and by default you can go up to 50 millimeters for both bar lengths. So this is the entire bar, and then this is the bar segment length. So what this would do is basically it would just round those numbers up. Usually most experts keep this checked off, and the reason for that is because sometimes you will have multiple bar segments that have different lengths, and it basically uses roundings for those lengths, and then for the entire bar it's also using roundings, but it's not taking into consideration the roundings from each bar segment. So it just kind of looks weird with different dimensions that don't seem to add up. So just something to keep in mind. So usually this would be left checked off. Then we have the reinforcement presentation. So this has to do when you have some reinforcement placed. And let's actually do that right now. So what I'll do over here is I'm just going to go to the section, and then here I'm just going to add a rebar that's going to be repeated, and then we're also going to turn on its visibility in all views. And now here you can see that rebar, and we can actually see each individual bar. Now, if I select this, you can see that here for presentation, I can set that up. Do I want to see all of them? Do I want to just select the ones that I want to be shown? Do I just want to show the one in the middle, or the ones on the beginning or the end? And this is really going to depend on your individual view preferences and just how you agree to work on and display rebar. So when it comes to the reinforcement settings and the option for that, usually you would leave this at show all. You can pick the first and last, and you can pick the middle, the ones that I have just shown you in the manual override. So you can set that up here for both view and section. And in most cases, you would just leave this at show all, and then readjust it in individual views as you wish. Then we have the area reinforcements. So this is basically for all of your area reinforcements, the abbreviations, and we can modify each one. So this is just the value for that abbreviation for the slab top, slab, the major direction, minor direction, so on and so forth. So you can just customize this if you want. Then we have the path reinforcement, and basically the same thing. We can adjust these abbreviations. Finally, we have the varying rebar set. So this is basically when you have a varying rebar set. The numbering method can be adjusted over here. So we have three options. One is to number bars individually. Basically, each bar has its own number. Then we have the assign unique number to each bar. So even if we have two identical sets, Revit will number them each as a separate position. Finally, we have match sets with identical bars. This basically means that if we have identical sets, they will be treated as the same position, and this is usually recommended as an option. And then these are just the suffix that you can assign, so the number suffix, and then it's just going to be 1.1, 1.2, and so on. So that works. And now I can just click OK and escape out of reinforcement settings. Now let's switch to cover settings. So the cover settings options are set up over here. You can select one, duplicate it, you can add new ones, you can delete existing ones, and so on. So for example, within our template, this is how that's set up, and this is kind of just a common set of rebar cover settings. Now, where do we actually use these? Well, we can use them here in the view. So for example, if I select this slab, you can find here in the properties, we have the cover settings, and we have the top face, bottom face, other faces, and it's just displaying that those values here. And if I open up this drop menu, you can see that these are all of the options that were available in that list. So if you want to add more options, you do it in that list. Now, this is one way to adjust cover settings. Another way would be just to go here to the Edit Rebar Covers tool, and then you click on that, and you can either pick elements like the entire concrete element, and then here you can pick one which will basically apply it to all faces, or it will apply this cover to all faces of this slab. However, if you want to have different ones for different sides, what you can do is you can just go here to pick faces, and then you can say, okay, I want this face over here, and then I want to use 40mm cover settings there. For this face over here, let's go with 25. For this face in the front, we can go with 50, and so on. So now if I select this, you can see that for the rebar cover other, it says varies, and then the top and bottom are 30mm. So that's how the cover settings work on the concrete tab. Now let's talk about the rebar tool. Now, before we do that, I'm just going to delete the existing rebar and then we can get started. Now, with the rebar tool, it's quite similar as with the cover, so you can either select an item, a concrete item here, and then here we have the reinforcement panel, and then you can just click on the rebar tool and then start placing it. Now, because we're in 3D, I can only create it as a 3D sketch, so I'm not going to be doing that, but yeah, that's just how it works. And then of course the other way to approach it is just to click here on rebar, then select the item. It's going to give you a little warning that adding rebar will lock in some of the reinforcement settings. That's something that we've mentioned a bit earlier in this video. Click OK, and now you can start placing it here. And again, it just goes into create by sketch. Now we're not going to be creating by sketch, so I'm just going to escape out of this, and now let's open up a section. So here I have a section just running through the middle. So let's just open that up and start placing some rebar. So when you click on rebar and click OK, it's going to give you a rebar shape browser. Now here, because this is part of our template, we have some custom shapes, but yeah, you're going to have just a lot of shapes by default, even if you're not using the template, and then you can just pick out of there and then place it here in your concrete elements. And now let's talk about all of these placement options that we have up here. Now we're going to start off with the expand to host and just look what that looks like when we're placing rebar. And then for the placement plane, we have three options. So you have the current work plane, which is basically where you're kind of cutting with that section. Then you have the near cover reference, which is just going to be your near parallel reference, and then you have the far cover reference, which is just going to be the far parallel cover reference. So what does this look like in reality? Well, if I just make sure here that the layout is set to single, and then for the bar, I'm just going to go with the 10mm bar, and let's place one here. Now, once you place it and hit the escape key a couple of times, go to the 3D view and you can't really see it. You can see it when you select the element and then it's transparent. But if you want to see the actual rebar, you need to select it and then go here to graphics, go to edit, and then let's turn it on in both 3D view and level 1. Click OK. Now in level 1, we can see it here. It's basically overlapping with this view, and here in the 3D view, it's there in the middle. Now, if I go back here and then go again to rebar and use the same one, but switch this from current work plane to near cover reference, and then place it like so, we're going to get this warning saying that it's not visible in this view. So now if I go to the, let's open up the 3D view, hit the escape key a couple of times, select it, and then I think we can see it here. Yeah, it's over here. So what we can do is just select it, hold the shift key to remove the slab from selection, and then we just have the rebar selected, and here we can make it visible. So now you can see with that near cover reference, it's just going to place it on this side. If we go back and just repeat the same thing and just place it on the far reference, click OK, and then also let's make it visible in the 3D, and then go to the 3D view. See? Okay, it's there. Okay, let's select it again. I guess I made that change for the new ones, not for this one. So let's just make it visible like so. Perfect. So that's basically what are these settings: near cover reference, work plane, and far cover reference. Now let's select all of them, and then I'm just going to delete this rebar, and then we can continue. So I'm just going to open up the section again, select it, go to shape driven rebar, okay. And now we're sticking with expand to host, but now I just want to talk about the placement to work plane. So this should usually be in line. I'm just using a smaller screen or just a zoomed screen so you can see it better on YouTube. But yeah, this should be available just in line. And then you have these three options. So you have parallel to work plane. Now I'm just going to switch this to current work plane, and then we can see currently this is what it looks like, and now it's set to parallel to work plane. So it's basically placing that rebar parallel to work plane, and then we can just pick out kind of which side we're at, and we can use the space key to kind of toggle around. Now if I switch this to parallel to cover, so what that's going to do is you come close to a cover, and then it's going to place that bar parallel to that cover. So if we're close to the horizontal one, it's going to go like this. If we get to the vertical one, it's then going to start placing it parallel to that cover, in this case vertically. And we also have perpendicular to cover. So you come close to the cover, and in this case this is the horizontal cover, and it's just placing it perpendicularly, in this case vertically. And then if we go to the vertical cover, it's going to place it horizontally. So that's what these options are for. And then, of course, we can place a rebar in the level view, just like this. So if you come to a level view like this, and then if I go to rebar, okay, and then I can place it. Now here, using the current work plane, it's usually going to go with the cut plane of that view, which is in most cases going to be outside of your concrete element, unless you're working with a column or something like that, or a wall. And then you would probably rely on the near cover or far cover reference. So in this case, let's go with near cover, and now as you can see, I can place it, and then I can use these placement tools in order to pick out what's the best option for whatever I'm trying to do. So I can place it just like this. Now, of course, when it comes to displacement, you can place your rebar, and then you can assign a layout rule. So we can just go with a single element like this, or we can assign a rule like maximum spacing. Let's go with 20, hit apply, and now as you can see, we have 20 elements basically repeated within this element. Now, if I just delete this, and then let's repeat the whole thing. And now I can set this up in kind of in advanced. So I can just say maximum spacing, go with 20, hit apply, and now as you can see, when I come close to the element, it's going to allow me to place these bars. So you can assign the rebar set layout rule and the distance or spacing. You can do that kind of in advance, or you can first place it and then assign it. It's really up to you. Now let's continue exploring the options for rebar placement by going here to the rebar tool, and then for the placement method, I'm not going to go with the expand to host. I'm going to go with by 2 points. Now here for the rebar shape, let's find this U-shaped rebar, so we're going to go with that. Then for the layout rule, I'm just going to stick with what we already have over here. Then I'm going to pick the near cover reference because we're in the plan view. And now by picking the by 2 points, we have a few additional options over here. So we have the option to place this horizontally or vertically. So what that means is if this is set to horizontal, I come to the concrete shape, and then you can see the cover lights up. It's just a dashed green line. I can click, and then as I expand, it's basically going to be placing this rebar horizontally, and then I can click wherever I like to place it. Now I'm just going to hit the escape key a couple of times and delete this, and let's then just repeat the whole thing by switching to vertical, and then if we go like that, as you can see, they can be placed vertically. Now if we hit escape again, start rebar again, and now if I pick a shape like this, like the 0, 0 shape, now here for the placement options, we have a few more. We have the parallel to work plane, but then we also here have the perpendicular segment. So what this means is when we pick that, it's basically going to be perpendicular. See how just these dots appear? So we're just placing that rebar perpendicular. So if I place it like this, select it, let's make sure it's visible in the 3D view as well. Go to the 3D view, and then this is what that would look like. Obviously you wouldn't be placing rebar like this, but this is just the placement method that we're exploring over here. Now I'm just deleting that. Let's go to the section view and let's continue exploring. So let's select it, go here to rebar. And this will always pop up unless you already have rebar in the model. Because I'm deleting the rebar and then doing it again, that's why it's always popping up. So just don't think this will always happen. It's just because this is an example model and we're always starting from no rebar. Okay, now let's pick the sketch option. So by sketch, you then just simply come here, you click on the element, and now you can start sketching. Now you can see there are no shapes available because, well, we are supposed to sketch out the shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here and make sure that this is set to shape driven. And what that means is if I create a shape that Revit already knows, like let's say this U-shaped rebar, and then hit finish, what will now happen when I select this, as you can see, it says shape 21. If I open up the shape browser, you can see that's this shape 21. It's an existing shape. So basically Revit recognized, okay, this shape exists. We're just going to label it as such. Now, if I decide to make any changes by going here to edit sketch, and then let's continue adding to this shape, something like that, and then hit finish, what will happen now? It says rebar shape number 1. So now if I open up the shape browser over here, you can see that it has basically created a new shape called rebar shape number 1. So if this is set to shape driven, it will create that new shape. So just keep that in mind, and you don't want to pollute your model with too many shapes, just generically called rebar shape 1000 or whatever. So if you don't want this, I'm just going to delete this one, and then you can always go here to families, then scroll down to structural rebar, and then here we have rebar shape, and at the bottom we will find our rebar shape 1. So it's saved over here, and if you don't want it, you just hit delete, and now it's gone, so you're not polluting all of your shapes. Now let's make it a little bit more complicated with something like this. So this is a swept blend shape, and we need to place some concrete on it. So how do we do that? Well, I'm just going to go here to this section, basically cutting through this thing, and then let's go here to concrete, and for that I'm going to use the path freeform rebar. You select that, click OK, and now we can start placing it. So first you pick out the shape. I'm just going to go with this shape 51. Then here I'm just going to go expand by host, just like that. Placement, okay, all looks good. And then here we have maximum spacing set to 200, perfectly fine. And now we can place this. I'm also just going to switch this to fine so we can see the full thickness. Now here you can hit the space key just to rotate this around, and then I'm just going to click to place this. Hit the escape key a couple of times, select it, go to view visibility states, and then I'm just going to check this on for the 3D view, click OK, and now we can see it here in the 3D view as well. Let's make that fine. Okay, now we can see this. So what we can do next is go here to path. So this is kind of the next step. We have created the shape. Now it's time to create or define the path. So here we just need to define the path like this line, for example, and then I can click finish, and as you can see, it's just going to create this rebar or place this rebar across that path. Now here we do have some problems. So first I'm just going to switch this to front elevation to see what's going on here, and the first issue I see is that it's kind of tilted. Obviously that's happening because this line is kind of tilting upward. So what we'll do is I'm just going to select it and then go to bar alignment and change this from aligned to path to vertical, and now as you can see it becomes vertical. This is nice, but again, it doesn't solve the whole issue. Now to continue adjusting this, I'm just going to select it, then go to edit constraints, and then you get these constraints over here. See these little kind of buttons. So I'm just going to click on this one and then align it to this one, for example. Okay, so let's then select the bottom and then align it like that. Okay, select this side, align it here. Okay, it's all coming together now. And then on this side here, you can see that it's kind of poking out. So for example, I can solve this by just giving it a minus 300 offset. So it's just going to pull this in a little bit, and there we go. Hit finish. And now we have a very complex shape, and we have a rebar that's following that shape perfectly. Now, if I open up this section again, what we can do here is we can go back to concrete. Then I'm going to go here to morphed freeform rebar, and this is going to allow us to place rebar kind of perpendicularly alongside either segments or entire bars. So I can just go like this for entire bars, and then as you can see, it's just going to create essentially a cage within this shape. So let's actually do that again. So just like that, hit finish, and there we go. So this is quite a complicated shape that we have managed to insert rebar into quite quickly by using these two tools. Now let's talk about the area reinforcement and path reinforcement. They're both located over here, and I'm just going to open up level 1. This is where I'm going to be placing it, and let's start with area reinforcement. You start that tool, you pick, in this case, a floor, okay, and now we can place it. So you basically sketch it out like you would with any sketch-based elements in Revit, so like floors, and then I'm just going to place that like so. And then you have the option to pick the major direction. So you can just pick the lines, or you can even draw that if you want, just like this. Okay, so once we have outlined this area reinforcement, then in the properties panel we can set it up. So here I'm just going to expand it a little bit, and here we can see all of the layers. So we have the top major direction, the bottom, the top minor direction. We can turn those on and off. Here we have the sizes, so you can change the size. You can change the spacing, so if we want, let's say these to be on, let's put these on 20, for example. We can also apply hooks, and then we can do the bottom major and minor direction, and also adjust their spacing, bars or bar sizes, the hooks, and so on. So now when I hit apply and hit finish, it will place that. It's also going to place this tag that we can see, and now just so we actually see this rebar, let's select it, and we need to select it like this. So this is just a symbol when you hover over it. So you know, like rooms, they have this kind of X symbol, so you need to find that, and now we can make sure it's visible in 3D and here, and now we can just check that out, and as you can see, this is what it looks like in 3D. Now let's get back to this tag, because I just want to demonstrate this here. See these basically abbreviations, T in parentheses, T, B in parentheses, and B. It's pulling all of this information from our reinforcement settings. So that's over here. See, these are those abbreviations. So here we have the T for the major and minor direction for this laptop, and then for the bottom we have those. If this was in a wall, it would be using these, and so on. So that's basically where it's pulling that information from. Okay, let's go to the 3D view. Now I just want to show you here, when you select the entire system, so like this, so you're not selecting just the set of rebar, but the entire area reinforcement like this. It should say structural area reinforcement, and then you can still continue to make changes. So for example, if I want for the major direction to have a 90-degree hook, I can apply that, and as you can see, it has those hooks, so we can do that. Of course, if you don't want to have this as part of a structural area reinforcement, you want a bit more control over individual bars and sets, you can always remove the area system. So now this is just all completely separate sets that can be adjusted individually. So that's how these work. Now I'm just going to delete all of those, and now let me show you the path reinforcement. So it works like this. Now here it's just telling us that we don't have a tag loaded. That's fine, I'm just not going to load it or have it. And now we can just place the path reinforcement like this, and then hit finish. So now let's turn on the visibility, like so. We can go to the 3D view. This is what that looks like. So it's basically a path with rebar. And then you can go here to layers and you can adjust all layers. Now you can have primary bars and also alternating bars if you want, like this. You can adjust their size. So if you want this one to be a bit larger, you can do that. You can adjust the spacing. So if you want smaller spacing, it would look like this, and so on and so forth. You can adjust, yeah, pretty much everything that's available over here. So the shape, is it starting with a hook or not, and so on. So this is a very easy way to place just a path of rebar, especially around openings or something like that. And then of course you can remove the entire system, and then it's just 2 sets of rebar, which you can manually adjust however you like. And finally, we're going to be exploring the fabric reinforcement in form of fabric area and fabric sheet. Now here in the project browser, if I scroll down to families and expand those and go down to structural, here we have the structural fabric areas, and we can see that, but we also have structural fabric reinforcement, and here we have the fabric sheets and fabric wire. So this is basically the products being used and applied over here. So if we go to fabric sheet, we can basically place a singular sheet. Here you can see all of the options that we have, so we can just pick one of these, and then we can basically place that sheet in our model, and it's going to look like that. So that's kind of very simple, very straightforward. However, I would prefer to use the fabric area because it allows you to, well, spread those sheets out. So here, if I click on that and then click on this floor, we have the option to draw a basically a boundary, just like we did previously. So here I'm just going to draw a boundary like this, and here you can see a lot of things happening. So basically what's going on is we're having sheets that are placed over here. Now in the settings, we have the partition, of course, but then the fabric sheet that's being used, so we can change that. We have the location, is it top or bottom? Then we have the splice position, so is it aligned, or perhaps something like this where it's kind of halfway staggered on the major way, or like this, or you can kind of play around with different options. And it's basically just looking at this overlap and different options how to apply that overlap. So you can pick out whatever works for your project or whatever is necessary for your project. Also here we have the options to just use these checkboxes in order to change how these sheets aligned with the edges. So we can check those on or off, and it's going to give us different results. Then here we have the wires at cover. So are they the major direction or minor direction at the cover, so at the bottom or at the top? And finally, we have the additional cover offset. So we have the basic cover offset associated with this floor. We can add additional cover offset if it's required by the fabric area. And then here we have the overlap value, which we can assign over here. Now, once we're done, we can just hit finish, and as you can see, it's going to look like this. We can then go to the 3D view. This is what that looks like in the 3D view, and then for each of these, or we can just select all of those, just like so. Filter, check none, select the reinforcement itself, okay. And then here we can make sure it's visible in the 3D, for example, and then this is what that's going to look like. So basically these fabric sheets have been positioned inside of this floor. So there we go. That's going to cover pretty much half of these options here on the concrete tab. It is quite a long video, but it is quite a lot of tools, and we haven't really talked about tools only. We have talked about also how to place them and some of the additional tools that pop up when we're using these ones. Now, if you like this video, please make sure to like it, and perhaps comment down below if you would like to see a whole new video or or part 2 dedicated to precast detailing and precast settings and so on. So we can perhaps do that in the future. As I said, if you want to get our courses or perhaps this structural reinforced concrete template or an ebook, you can go to balkanarchitect.com. Link is up in the cards above and also down in the description of this video. Thank you for watching, guys. Make sure to check out my website, balkanarchitect.com, for more Revit courses. There I have over 120 hours of content, and I'm adding more each week. Make sure to subscribe for more videos, and also I've added a video over there that might interest you as well.